Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to be able to speak to the very interesting conversation and debate we've just had, which ranged very wide and far indeed. And I am speaking to the specifics of the clauses mentioned in this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 28 would require the Chancellor to assess the impact of the bill on the environment, and new clause 34 would require the Chancellor to review the impact on the provisions of the Act on human and ecological well-being, including of future generations. New clause 13 would require the Chancellor to assess the impact of the Finance Bill on the UK meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. New clause 14 would require an assessment of the bill's impact on the UK meeting its Paris climate change commitments. Madam Deputy Speaker, I must say I could do no better than the member for Ilford North in rehearsing many of the achievements of the government in his speech, and I'm very grateful to him for doing that. He rightly highlighted the achievements we've made in terms of offshore wind. He might have mentioned the reduction. It was left to the lady, my right honourable friend, to mention the reduction in emissions, 42% since 1990 to 2017, while the economy grew by 2/3. So I don't need to dilate too much on that topic. Let me merely speak to these amendments to the legislation. These amendments are not necessary and they should not stand part of the bill. Tackling climate change is a top priority for the government, with the UK becoming the first major economy to pass legislation committing to reach net zero emissions by 2050. The government remains committed to meeting this milestone and has consistently demonstrated the UK's world leadership in clean growth and development. For example, the 2019 spending round included additional funding for biodiversity measures to support the maintenance and restoration of vital habitats for wildlife and to deliver the 25-year Environment Plan. Following this, the spring budget reinforced our track record in this area, announcing at least £800 million for carbon capture and storage. That should be of great interest to the gentleman from Weaver Vale, who's no longer in his seat, and over £1 billion of further support for ultra-low emission vehicles. It also announced that we will at least double funding for energy innovation. The clauses in this bill, however, also highlight the progress we're making towards and our commitment to tackling climate change, as well as towards sustainable low-carbon development and to meeting international agreements. Thus, the bill provides significant incentives to support the continued decarbonisation of transport. Clause 83 establishes tax support for zero-emission vehicles, exempting them from the vehicle excise duty expensive car supplement. The bill also ensures that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs can make preparations for the introduction of the plastic packaging tax, rightly highlighted by my friend, the member for Harrogate and Knaresborough, which will incentivise businesses to use 30% recycled plastic instead of new material in plastic packaging. The government is also reopening and extending the Climate Change Agreement scheme to support energy-intensive businesses to operate in a more environmentally friendly and sustainable way. If I may, what I'm going to do is speak to the clauses and then I'll take points made by members in the debate. New clause 28 would require the Chancellor to assess the impact of the bill on the environment, specifically considering the impact on achieving net zero emissions by 2050, meeting carbon budgets, and on air quality standards and biodiversity. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government is committed to meeting its net zero milestone. The net zero review continues to make progress, although, let us be clear, like everything else, the capacity to consult with a wider group of stakeholders has been affected by COVID, and many resources have been devoted to COVID-related matters, given the position that we're in. But it continues to make progress, and we will publish a call for evidence which allows businesses and stakeholders the chance to engage seriously ahead of its publication. Carbon pricing has already contributed to emissions reductions in the power sector, as the share of coal-based electricity fell from 40% in 2012 to 5% in 2018, something again of which I think everyone should be proud. Future climate strategies will be set out in due course, including as part of the National Infrastructure Strategy. The government's also created skills advisory panels to help local areas understand their current and future skills needs, including in low-carbon industries, and to tailor provision accordingly to that. The government will assess the impacts of potential interventions against the contribution they make to our environmental goals, including on climate change and air quality targets. New clause 13 would require an impact assessment of the bill on the UN meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals within 6 months of royal assent. It's already a requirement. It's important to remember this. It's already a requirement of UN member states to review their progress towards meeting these global goals at least once, and we as a country have been proactive in assessing this and reporting back to the UN. New Clause 14 would require a review of the bill on the UK in meeting its UN Paris climate change agreements. Under the Paris Agreement, the government must maintain and report on its emissions reduction commitments in the form of a nationally determined contribution. The UK's legally binding commitment to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050 is amongst the most stringent in the world, and the system of governance that implements this commitment under the Climate Change Act of 2008 is world leading. New Clause 34 would require the Chancellor to review the impact on the provisions of the Act on human and ecological well-being, including of future generations. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Environment Bill is designed to ensure that the environment is at the heart of all environmental policy making, and that this government and future governments are held to account if they fail to uphold their environmental duties through a newly established Office of Environmental Protection, including legally binding long-term targets on biodiversity, air quality, water, resource efficiency and waste management on top of the net zero target. Let me, if I may, now turn to some of the comments that were made, which I thought were of great interest. My friend, the Right Honourable Member for South Northamptonshire, was absolutely right in highlighting the government's record in this area. The gentleman for Aberdeen South raised the question of his challenge on top-ups. And my question here, as elsewhere, is that we look with great interest to see whether this policy is effective, and if it's effective, we'll look even more closely at whether our own policy in the UK government needs to be changed. But it's obviously far too early to be able to say that, and if he believes, as we believe, that actions matter, not just words, then I'm sure he'll agree. If, of course, the Scottish Government wants to do more in that area, it's received an additional £3.8 billion through COVID funding, and it can divert some of that if it wishes to. In terms of, I'm afraid I just don't have any time. I'm afraid, at the end, if I do, I'll come back. I do want to single out, I want to respond to the Honourable Lady for Hornsey and Wood Green. She raised the question, she rightly highlighted the importance of local authorities in terms of cycling, walking and tree planting. I agree with her about that. She asked about the replacement strategy for ETS. I think she is aware that we have framed two alternatives here. One is a UK ETS and the second is a carbon emissions tax. We are open to a negotiated agreement, but we have the resources through either of those options to implement a scheme that addresses the issues that she is concerned about. Let me come finally to the question, the comments made by the Honourable Lady Member for Cardiff North, who called for leadership, not rhetoric. I wonder whether she was referring to the Welsh Government, which has been disastrous in the tree planting plans that it's made itself. It seems to be way behind on its own tree planting estimates. But I think she specifically picked out the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. Now, as my right honourable friend mentioned, this is, from a value for money project, a terrible waste, or would be a terrible waste of public money. That money could be spent much better. I spent a lot of time looking at it when I was a minister in the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, who chunters from a sedentary position, is quite wrong on that. It's terrible value for money. But what is so fascinating is it's also not an environmentally wise idea. She may not be aware that the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales specifically highlighted the major impact on biodiversity, the loss of intertidal habitat, the impact on local ecology. National Resources Wales talked of a major adverse impact. So I agree with her. I think that actions matter and not words. Leadership matters, not rhetoric, and I wish we had seen it, and we are seeing it, by turning down this very bad project. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is committed to tackling climate change and to being the first generation to leave the environment in a better condition than we inherited, and these measures go towards making that happen.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had an excellent debate, particularly on, if I may say so, on this side.